Hi guys, in this video I want to talk a little bit about head talk. So in the training we've talked that it can be useful to discern between or separate or split the idea of a head intelligence or thinking brain and a body intelligence or the true self. So the thinking brain and the true self. And we talked a little bit about the idea of splitting. So when you're with a client, you can identify the thinking brain and the intelligent body, or the thinking brain and the true self. And what we want to do is have them believe that even though mind and body are connected as one, that there are different intelligences, and that the true self, as we've talked about in another video, the true self communicates through the body, and our feeling state will comprise our emotions, our intuitions, our biological feelings, hunger, tiredness, those sorts of things, and moods, and how emotions are reasonably instant and moods tend to be a little bit longer. Now this video is not about that. This video is about looking at identifying head talk. So once we've introduced this idea that, well, the thinking brain can have one idea of things and the true self or the intelligent body can have an entirely different perspective, what we want to do, your job as a therapist, your job as a coach, is to be the advocate for the intelligent body, to introduce the client to the idea that, well, there is this intelligence within them that their thinking brain may not be attuned to. What we want to do as a part of the coaching process is bring these two items together, because we need a thinking brain and we need a feeling body. And one of the ways in which that we can attune ourselves to this, well, there are two ways that we want to attune ourselves to this. One is listening to the tone, the pitch, and the strength of a client's voice. And when a client is talking to you and they're aligned with their true self, and they're in touch with their intelligent body, you will feel, and there may be a slight, their voice tone will be slightly firmer, more grounded, as compared to if they are talking from their head, the thinking brain. The voice might be slightly higher, they might be slightly wavery, the sound is likely to be different. And one of the things that you want to be doing, if you can, it's not absolutely crucial, it's just if you can, is pay attention to that. And you're calibrating this to the individual. I know there's a lot out there about body language, and I'm not a fan particularly of generic body language where we're making sweeping generalizations about how someone is because they've got their arm folded and these sorts of things. I think we need to calibrate everything to the individual. Sometimes it might be obvious, sometimes not. If you don't hear any difference in voice, if that's fine, you don't want to concern yourself about that. It's just sometimes you may find that it is obvious that there's this really, yes, this is how I feel about it, and oh, well, yeah, this is how I feel about it. And when you get any examples like that, I really want to take this job, or I really want to take this job, you'll begin to notice, and I'm being extreme there, but you'll begin to notice. And if you do begin to notice, great, because then you can if you've introduced this idea of well, there's your thinking brain, which has one opinion, and there's your intelligent body, which has another opinion. You can introduce them that you, as the advocate for their intelligent body, are suggesting that maybe what they're saying is not aligned. Now, another thing about that, we've talked about in the manual, if you have a look in the manual, at the focusing and the vocalizing technique. The vocalizing technique is simply the idea of, and it's relevant in a number of areas which we'll be covering throughout the training. It is the idea that when somebody says something, they will have a feeling with that. Our body emotionally responds to what we do, and we're getting feedback, and that's what part of what emotions are for. They are feedback about our interaction with our environment. So what happens is that because language and what we say is a behavior, you will experience emotion, feeling when you talk, and it is entirely different from saying something in your head. And this is why one of the things we want to do is get clients to say things out loud. So if a client is rattling around something in their head, having them say it out loud and pay attention to how they feel as they say it is important. So if a client says something and you're not quite sure and you think it may be their thinking brain that's coming, and then they may be out of alignment with their true self, invite them to say it out loud, and as they do, invite them to pay attention to how their body feels. Now, part of what we've talked about with focusing is the idea for us of focusing is simply about talking about how the body feels. I think it might be useful if I talk about focusing in a separate video, which I'll do to make sure I keep these videos brief. So that's the first thing, is listening out and calibrating to the client whether you sense they're talking from the thinking brain or whether they're talking from the intelligent body. If you can't notice any difference, that's fine. The other thing to look out for, listen out for, is what we're going to call rather lightheartedly as masturbations. So when a client uses words like think, should, have to, ought to, got to, must, and when your client is using any of those types of words, there's every chance that it's the thinking brain, and that is a reflection of mass consciousness and conditioning. And when we are, so really it means it's detached from true self. And what we want to is align the client with, well, what is it you feel you really want? So if a client is saying, I think I should do this, you want to invite a client to, firstly, you may be asking them how they feel, what they notice in their body, but also you want to bring them back to the idea of, well, what is it you feel in here that you really want? And invite them to say it out loud. So those are the two things that we want to be listening to, and that's the kind of idea of head talk. Is it is entirely possible for a person to have one view of life and from the thinking brain, and it's entirely possible for their intelligent body to have an entirely different view of life. What we know from academics is that your brain will just, your thinking brain will just fill in the gaps, and it'll just make up something plausible. Most things are driven by how we feel. And as I say, we've got a combination of all of those things. Let me give you a quick example of that. There was some research done, I think reasonably recently, and it looked at judges on parole hearings, and they looked at the outcome of these parole hearings where judges were making a judgment just prior to lunch and then just after lunch. So this was judges who were full and happy after having a nice lunch, and judges that may be a bit grumpy from not having had lunch and were hungry. And what they found was, I think in something like less than 10% of cases where the parole hearings were before lunch were they granted parole, and more than 60% were granted parole after lunch. And of course, the argument of the researchers being that biological urges will drive decisions, and this is one of the things that we suggest in our work, is how we feel drives what we do. It drives our perceptions, because how we feel is a mix of all of these things. So that was the argument put forward. When this was put to judges, when they were asked about their decisions, because they were completely unaware of the fact that in some instances they were unhappy because they were hungry, in other instances they were satisfied because they were full, they gave entirely plausible reasons as to why they made those decisions. So this is the thing, is that we need to be mindful that, certainly if you're working with somebody with symptoms, that they may tell you that everything is absolutely fine. I was living my dream life. And you know that that is coming from the thinking brain, which is filling in the gaps. And because there may be other motivations for that, we're all familiar with the idea of denial, that if you're aiming for something and you look around the world and you think, well, I've got a nice house and a nice car, I should be happy. Therefore, if I should be happy, I'm not even going to look at the fact that maybe I'm not, because there's a cognitive dissonance that's involved there. The fact that, well, I've got everything that I think I should have, yet at the same time my body feels unhappy. So what we'll do is I'll shove aside the fact my body feels unhappy, and I'll keep believing that this conditioning which tells me that, well, having this nice car and this nice house means that I should be happy, so yes, I'll be happy. And of course, when you listen to people, when you go out and listen to people in Starbucks and down the pub and in restaurants and on bus stops, people will have this continual external focus. And of course, that's another big area which I'll talk about in another video. So those are the two things we want to be listening out for in head talk: is the masturbations of the thinks, shoulds, the shoulds, the musts, the have tos, the ought tos, the got tos, and also the voice, tone, tempo and strength. Okay, see you in the next video.